Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi, I'm Kay, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi. Well, gosh, the birthday people and the first speaker certainly said it all. I want to thank Mike for asking me to speak. It's a pleasure to be here. Particularly in Westchester, because this is my old hood. I grew up in Westchester, and in fact, this whole neighborhood just has so many memories. It's a little bizarre, but in fact, I went to Westchester High School. Are there any other alumni of Westchester High here tonight? Okay. I unfortunately graduated in 1969, but I was a lowrider actually in Westchester. We were a rough group in those years. I've always been told that you share a little bit about what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. As I said, I grew up in Westchester, which was a fine place to grow up. There certainly was nothing. It was a nice part of town. Nothing would have been right for me. You know how that is. I had a very waspy family that I grew up in. I had 3 brothers, and we were good little Christian Scientists. In fact, we used to go right over here to the little Christian Science church, which is, I'm getting my directions confused, but it's around here somewhere. And everything was great. And when I was about 4 years old, my mother divorced my father because she claimed he was an alcoholic. And my father would come to pick us up one day a week. That was visitation day, and my day was Monday. And my father would come and pick me up, and we would go out. And my father was a true 50s playboy kind of guy. I mean, he was cute. He slicked his hair back. He wore Hawaiian shirts and had his cigarettes rolled up in them. And he used to drive a 1954 Chevrolet convertible, and he'd pick me up on Monday afternoon. He'd come, and I'd go out to his car, and I remember being so excited to see him. And this was in the days before seatbelt rules, I guess, because I remember standing up next to him in the car with my arm around him, and he always had his glass of bourbon in one hand and his cigarette in the other. I just thought he was the neatest thing that ever happened, and I was crazy about this man. I really was, and he was such a 50s playboy. He had one of those apartments, you know, where those hideous 1950s, like beach scenes, you know, that was sort of backlit, and he had like Playboy posters all over his apartment. And what we would do on Mondays is we would drive down Manchester to a hotel somewhere in Hawthorne, I think, as my recollection is, it was called the Thunderbird Hotel, I think, I don't know. And he was always dating some big busted manicurist, you know, and we would, which probably is what happened with my parents' marriage, but anyway, we would go down to this, the Thunderbird Hotel, and we would go into the cocktail lounge, and Dad would have a few. And but I loved it. I loved the atmosphere of bar. I was 4 or 5 years old, but I could see then that this was a fun place to be. And there was a camaraderie, you know, that they had in bars. My dad also, before he'd take me home, we'd have to get a couple more in, and we'd go to the Cavalier Room. Everything in my past is in Westchester. We'd go to the Cavalier Room, and he'd have a few drinks, and I'd nurse my Shirley Temples, and he'd get drunk, and he'd take me home, and my mother would get so upset because the bourbon would be in my clothing, the smell, and I reeked of cigarettes, and she'd be so upset. But I couldn't wait till next Monday to go out with Dad again, and this went on for quite a long time. I was, you know, I don't know. Through the years, I have changed my opinion on whether or not we come into this world alcoholics, or if it's our upbringing, or it's a combination. I don't know. I don't care. You know, all I know is that for me as a child, I was very, very frightened of everything. I was phobic. I was neurotic. I was afraid of dogs, which is a very inconvenient phobia to have because dogs are everywhere, you know. And I remember it was just such a chore for me to get from home to school because everybody had a dog in the neighborhood. Actually, we had a dog. I was terrified to go out in my own backyard. And maybe it's because my father would always get these strays that were wild and nobody could handle. And they were just always barking, and I was just scared. And I remember someone said to me once, "Don't run. You know, if you run, they'll follow you." And I would always run. I was never the kind of person that was courageous, ever. You know, and I wanted to be. I used to watch movies and look at how people who were courageous acted and fantasize that maybe I would one day have courage. I never did. I was just frightened, like I said, and phobic, and my parents didn't know what to do with me. We'd go to my relative's house, and they'd have a dog, and I'd have to, you know, wait out in the other room, and they'd have to hide the dog. I mean, life had to always be adjusted to accommodate my neuroses and my fears. But I also believe that it's my own little theory, that alcoholics never look as nuts as they are. At least I speak for myself. I never looked as frightened and as weird as I was. And of course, my biggest fear was that you would know how weird that I was. And I was also self-obsessed. So I was always thinking about my fear, you know, and judging my fear. My whole life was me, you know, it was tiring. And it was not a pleasant place to be, believe me. But you know, I went along well, and like I said, I don't think people knew about it, but I was always in trouble with my family. I had these 3 brothers, as I mentioned, who were good guys. To this day, they're good guys. They were wonderful boys, but I just was the one, everything was contempt prior to investigation. My parents said, "Let's do this," and I'd say no. That was my big vocabulary, was no, I don't want to do that. I never wanted to try anything new because my fear was I didn't like change. My parents used to have to break it to me gently if we had a house guest because it was going to change the mood of the house. I was a rough kid. I would have hated to have a child like myself. I would have put me in well, that's a bit much, but anyway, my parents didn't know what to do with me, but they devised a punishment that they called the white chair. And the white chair was literally just that. It was a white chair in the corner, and I would have to go sit on the white chair for hours and think about how I was going to improve my attitude and my behavior. And I would go sit on this white chair and hate them, basically, and fantasize that they were gone and I had a whole new family that I named. I had the Howard family. And frankly, the Howards got me through childhood, I can tell you. And it got to the point where I would go to this white chair for recreation, you know, I mean, and my parents were getting worried because, as you know, when you're not a part of life, you just get this world of your own. And I was here and my family was over here. And recently I went to visit my family and they were bringing out old photographs and old movies of our growing up. And there's just the missing years where Kay's not there. And I'm just not there, you know. And but I wasn't using yet. I was a tomboy. I was innocent. I was a sweet kid. I loved sports. I wore a little ponytail and bobby socks. And I was a good little kid, but one summer, I guess I had crossed the invisible line into where they just didn't know what to do with me, and they put me on a real big restriction. It was between my 12th and 13th year. They put me on this restriction where I couldn't talk in the house. I had to write on a tablet. I had to go to bed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was really a strange kind of punishment. And it lasted about 3 months. And I got real bitter. And I kind of flipped right about that time. And I just thought, to hell with all of you. And I went nuts. And I mean, at that period of time, whenever that was, early 60s, mid 60s, I guess it was, a young girl had 3 choices of sort of what you could become. If you had sort of blonde, bouncy hair, you could sort of take the cheerleader route, or if you were a surfer-type girl, you could be that. I chose lowrider. I did. I cut my ponytail off, and I ratted my hair up really high, and I wore a ton of makeup, and I went from ponytail, innocent tomboy to Torrance slut overnight. And I attracted an entire new group of friends, believe me. I mean, I just came back to school and I looked bad. I looked real bad. And I got this boyfriend, and he had a 1949 Oldsmobile, lowered Oldsmobile with a gold metal flake top, and he smoked dope, and there we were. And we drive up and down Manchester Boulevard, listening to the Doors and the Chambers Brothers and getting stoned. And that's really what I did through high school. But I looked so bad. My poor brothers, who were very innocent, they were valedictorian and captain of the football team, and In fact, one time I was joking with this guy who took me to the senior prom, and again, I looked like a rough girl, but I wasn't. I was too frightened to... I'm convinced I was the only virgin at Westchester High, truly. But I didn't look like it, believe me. And like I said, I was always with people that did drugs, and I was doing them with them. But I had this look, and I would wrap my hair up, and I had this philosophy, because I was so not a human being, that if I was walking towards you, that's all that really counted, and once I was beyond you, it was history. And so I never brushed the back of my hair, ever. And you can't ratchet your hair up like that and put a can of Aquanet on it and not have problems. And I developed this knot of hair in the back of my head. And I remember, I tell this story because it's sort of how I live life, as sick as it was. I remember I was mortified that someone would see this thing on the back of my head. I mean, I was just humiliated. They would see it. I remember sitting in assemblies at school, in high school, and having people say, what is it? on the back of her head. And be humiliated, like I said, but it never crossed my mind, not once, did it ever occur to me. All I had to do was go to a hairdresser, get it cut out, it was fine. It never occurred to me. I thought, that's just how life is. It's uncomfortable. You just get through it. Life is tough. And so I had this thing in the back of my head. I was out to here with the makeup, the short skirts, the runs in my nylons, the going with low riders, and I was their gun mall. We used to work at the Loyola Theater, which is now office building, and my boyfriend was big on stealing other people's tires. And I was their lookout girl, and we were just a mess. But it was the 60s, and it was sort of excusable to be a mess. Everybody was sort of a mess at the time. And in fact, if you weren't a mess, there was something, you weren't cool or something, I guess. But we were the drug generation. We go to love-ins, and we dropped a little acid, and we do all that. But you know what? I never drank, and the reason I didn't drink at that time was because I had heard the stories. I knew I had an aunt who, my aunt used to be in fact, she was the warm-up act for Lenny Bruce up in San Francisco. She was his warm-up act for years, and she was a neat woman in her early days, but she became a horrible alcoholic, and I'd seen her, and then my father, who was an alcoholic, and it was just ran in our families, and luckily for me, I didn't like it. I'd had a few beers, I'd had a few of my dad's bourbons at some point, and I hated alcohol, so I thought I'll just do drugs. And I did. And then when I was about 18 years old, I worked at a theater in Inglewood. I was an usherette, and that's what we used to call ourselves. They don't have usherettes anymore, do they? Well, in those days, your job was to carry a flashlight and direct people to their seats. Boy, am I dating myself tonight. Anyway, I was an usherette, and we had Funny Girl opening. This must have been 68, and Funny Girl was a big movie when it came to Los Angeles, and we had packed houses every night. And I remember this one night I was fatigued, and I said to a friend of mine, "Do you have anything? I'm tired." Everything was chemically induced, and he said, "Yes, I have something, take this," and it was a methadone, little meth tab, and I took one, and I was always very impatient, and about 5 minutes later I said, "Bob, I don't feel anything," and he said, "Well, then take another," and I took another, and I took in a span of about 10 minutes, I'd taken about 9 little meth tabs, and I was very wired. We had those people back in their seats ready for Funny Girl to start before the popcorn got cold. I mean, we were just... And I spent the next 3 days in my room with dry heaves. I was identifying with you were talking about getting sick, and my parents never knew about my drug use either. I don't know how. I was on downers, I was on speed, I was on the floor all the time with my books from the night before, my school books. Wake up the next morning, and I could always say I had the flu, and they seemed to buy it. How that is, I don't know. But I was introduced to my first drink, which was the love of my life, when I was about 18, at least the first drink that I liked. I was a big druggie at this point, and I finally met a guy who I kind of got rid of the lowrider look, and was looking a little bit nicer, and so I attracted this other type of fellow, and he was a drinker, and he said, we're going to go to a party tonight, but I'm going to tell you up front, I would like you to impress my friends. And I said, "Oh, I don't do that. It's not something I do." And he said, "Well, have a couple of drinks." He said, "Just loosen up." He said, "You're so uptight." He said, "Just have a couple of drinks." And I said, "I don't like alcohol. I just don't like it." And he said, "Well," he said to one of his friends, he said, "Go get her that pink stuff." And so they went and got me this pink stuff, which was called Right Time. And Right Time was a carbonated malt liquor wine. And I don't know what proof it was, but it got you drunk fast. And I gagged down my first 2 bottles of pink Right Time, and I felt wonderful. And I felt gracious and charming, and said, "Where are your friends? Let me have them. I'm ready to go." And he did, and we had a lovely party, and I pretty much decided at that moment why stop doing this? Why stop doing this ever? And I didn't. And I proceeded from the time I took my first little right time drinks to drink like a drunk until I got here. I just started drinking all the time. I changed my friends. My friends went from my druggy friends to my drinking friends. I'd still do some drugs, but I really loved alcohol. I loved alcohol for three very important reasons. One, it was legal, it was cheap, and you didn't have to worry about narcotics officers in your rearview mirror, which we had been accustomed to looking out for years. And it just seemed so easy. For $1.89, you could go get a bottle of Gallo Weingarten, drink it, go get another one. It was excellent. It was just so practical for someone who didn't want to be a part of this world. And I fell in love with wine. I was a wino too. And I guess there's a lot of us who made it to Alcoholics Anonymous, not from switching to wine, but only drinking wine. And I did drink champagne and liqueurs. I remember a friend of mine once invited me to her home and made the grave mistake of asking me if I wanted something from her liquor cabinet. And she had a liquor cabinet full of creme de mint and peppermint schnapps and Kahlua and Harvey's Bristol cream. And I thought, great. And she had gone to the supermarket, and I just cleaned out her liquor cabinet. And of course, those are very sickeningly sweet drinks, but I got to the point where I could handle all those sugar-filled drinks. It didn't bother me at all, and I lived off of them. I never ate, and I maintained my weight too. So I was just living off the sugar of all of these wines and liqueurs, and I just drank from morning till night. And I'd get jobs. I was always good at getting the interview. I was good at going the initial 5 inches of the mile, but that was about it. I could do the beginning, but don't ask me to continue, because I was, as I talked about with my hair, I was sort of a false front. There was nothing real ever inside. I was just making the motions. I was a phony. I was a fraud, and I knew it. But if you stay drunk enough, you don't have to think about it, and that's pretty much what I did. Just stay drunk enough so you don't have to think about it. And I had a little apartment in Culver City, and this apartment actually was Santa Monica at that time, and I had an apartment that was a 3-bedroom apartment with a formal dining room and a big kitchen and a big patio. And I had one piece of furniture in that apartment, or two, a refrigerator and a mattress on the floor of one of the 3 bedrooms. I didn't need this apartment. Nobody was coming to call. And yet my drinking buddies on occasion would come in, and I would always never let them go beyond the front door. I didn't want them to see how I lived. I didn't want anybody to see, I was going to say who I was, I should say who I was not, because I had a sneaking, sickening feeling that there was nobody there. And I also had a sickening, sinking feeling that there was somebody there with you guys. And again, I just didn't want to think about it, because it was very sad, very lonely, as you said, and it was terrifying. And so that's just how I got through. Again, just life is uncomfortable. You just suck it up and keep drunk. And towards the end of my drinking, I had a very set routine. I learned how to my world became very, very small. Normal things that you do in life, like going to the supermarket, maybe going out to dinner, maybe going to the movies, these kinds of things, I slowly would figuratively cross them off my list. I couldn't do them anymore. So I just think, well, I don't have to go to movies. I can learn to live without going to movies, because I can't sit through a movie. I flip out. I have too much anxiety. And I can't go to the supermarket anymore, because if I have a whole shopping cart full of stuff and I have to run out, what are they going to think of me, the girl behind the counter? So I don't have to go to supermarkets. I can just go to like Danny's Liquor on La Tijera and just pick up my wine, my cigarettes, and a loaf of bread and get out quickly. I learned how to adjust my life to my disease, and my world got very small. And when I tell you that the last year of my drinking I had a routine that did not vary, I am not exaggerating. I drank a couple of gallons of wine a day, Gallo Weingarten, that was my favorite. It had an ever so slight carbonation, and it got me drunk. And it was cheap. And my routine was this: I would get up in the morning. My roommate, the one woman who would allow me for $150 to sleep on her couch, we had a little house in Inglewood, or she had a little house in Inglewood, and a 3-year-old son, and a maid she had. I would sleep on her couch, and I knew in the morning that I had 15 minutes for her to take her son to St. Jerome School, and that gave me just enough time to scrape off just enough ice off the freezer into my 8-ounce water glass of wine to just take off the chill so I could get down my first glass. And then I would get a couple glasses of wine down, she'd come home, and then I'd take my Boda bag of wine and go to whatever little job I was faking for a while, you know what I mean? I used to throw pencils up at styrofoam ceilings. I worked for an architect, this one job that I had, and it was very important for him, I'm sure, that I kept the blueprints. But I never kept the blueprints because I was lazy. I didn't want to file. I wanted to be an executive, a corporate executive. He wanted me to file his blueprints. I never would, and my drawers and my little filing cabinets would get so full, I just threw them out. And one day he wanted the blueprint for the Martinique project, and I didn't have them, and he fired me. And this was, like I said, this is all part of my routine. I would have these jobs. I would constantly be fired. But getting back to my routine, I had a Dodge Challenger that my stepfather had given me. Dodge Challengers were guy cars. This car had a 440 Magnum engine. It idled at 55 miles an hour. And this is what I was driving drunk through the streets of Westchester. It's a miracle I didn't wipe out neighborhoods, believe me, because I was so drunk all the time. But I would take my little Dodge Challenger, and I would get in full makeup to go to eat dinner where I ate every single night, which was the Jack in the Box at Manchester. And that's where I would go, and I'd take this Dodge Challenger, and I know some of you can probably identify with this when I tell you that it took every ounce of courage that I had to go drive to the little window, the little Jack head, and order what I ordered every single night. I ordered black coffee and a breakfast Jack. That's what I ordered every night for dinner. And I got that done. I got my order in. And then I get up to the window, and I would hope that she, whoever she was, or he, would not see in my car, because I'd have breakfast Jack wrappers piled up, wine bottles, cigarette wrappers, ashes, because that's what I was. I was a bum. And I would hope that she wouldn't dislike me and look in my car, because I didn't want her to see how I was living, but that's how I was living. So once I got over that humiliation, after I would do this, I was exhausted. That was my big outing for the day. I would go home, back to the fort with my supplies, and just get drunk until I passed out and do the same thing over again. And then the next night, I'd get in full makeup. It's the 70s, I put my little scarf on and go to Jack in the Box. And that was the routine. And that's how it was. And again, I just thought that's how it would stay. I'd seen the movies. In fact, one of my favorite movies of all time was a movie called The Helen Morgan Story, about one of the most early famous alcoholics, Helen Morgan, who was a great singer. And the movie was with Ann Blythe and Paul Newman, and she was a torch singer, and she was always literally falling off pianos drunk. And I love that movie. I watched that movie all the time. I know we didn't have videos then, but whenever it was on, I would watch it. I loved movies about alcoholics. And I would cry and think, those poor, pathetic people. But one day, I had gone to therapy. Finally, I'd gone to therapy, and I was telling my therapist, after 2 years of going to therapy, it occurred to me that I had a drinking problem, sort of. And I wondered why she never brought it up. And she never asked me how much I drank. And so I asked her, I said, Dorothy, would you like to know how much I drink? And she said, all right, how much do you drink? And I said, I drink a couple gallons a day. And she goes, how long have you been doing this? And I said, for quite a few years. And she said, really? She said, honey, it sounds to me like you have an addiction to alcohol. And I said, yeah. I said, what do I do about it? And I started to cry. Because I don't know, I just started to cry. And she handed me a box of Kleenex, and she said, honey, I don't know. I'm not a mechanic. I don't have those tools. And besides that, your time is up. I'll see you next week. And again, in those days, now this woman actually is quite an alcoholism counselor, but in those days, this was 1974, and I think that they've learned a lot over the years. I really do, because I don't think, at least in those days, so many of us would go to therapy, we would go drunk, and nobody would ever ask us, why do you smell like wine every day? And why are you blurry-eyed during our session? It never came up. And I remember leaving her session this one night, and I was so despondent, and I was starting junior college again. I was always starting junior college. I never would stay, but I was good at the first night. Give me the homework assignments and what the curriculum is, and I'm out of here. But I was good at starting. And I went to Santa Monica Junior College that night thinking, one more time, I hate life. I just hate life. And I was just so depressed because my therapist wasn't going to help me. And I don't know. And I started to cry, and I just said, God help me. God help me. And I don't think I thought anything about it. I don't think there was any spiritual belief going on there. I just think I was exhaling on a cigarette, frankly. And I pulled into my parking spot, and at this particular moment, a girl pulled into her parking spot in this blue van, and she got out of her car at the exact same time I got out of mine. And we started to chat, as I recall, and she said, you look lost. And I said, I am. And she said, can I help you get to your classroom? And I said, please, thank you. We started walking through the campus, and she asked me what class I was taking, and I asked her, what class are you taking? And she said, She said, well, I'm not. She said, I'm here to give a lecture on alcoholism and drug abuse. And I said, for it or against it? I didn't know why you would talk about such a thing. And she thought that was a peculiar question that I'd posed to her, and she said, I guess both. She said, why do you seem so interested? And I said, I don't know. I said, I think I have a problem. And she said, really? I said, yeah, you know how other newcomers are. And so she said, ooh, a live one. And she asked me for my phone number. Now, this was October the 1st, 1974. It was very hot. It was a heat wave, as it can be in October. And I was so out of touch. I was always wearing wool. And I had this scarf around my neck and a turtleneck sweater. And I was, and my hair was matted. And I had makeup on top of last month's makeup. And I'm sure I thought I looked cute, but I did not, certainly. And she asked for my phone number, and to show you how out of touch I was, I thought she was interested. I know that sounds weird, but that's where I was coming from. And I was so ego-driven and so pathetic, you know what I'm saying? You got to tell the truth around here, as embarrassing as sometimes it can be. But anyway, I let her have my phone number, thinking, well, I don't know what her problem is. And the next day, I was sitting on my front lawn with my roommate's 3-year-old son and the cleaning woman, and the gas man had driven by, and he gave me that "you bum" look. And I'm sure I gave him my sign, And the phone rang, and it was this girl. And she said, are you sober? And I said, no. And she said, well, can you drive and meet me at the Marriott Hotel by LAX? I want to talk to you. And I said, yeah, I can do that. And I don't know what made me go. Well, I do know I know now what made me go, but I didn't know at the time what made me go. Some kind of a weird instinct, I think, comes over us when we ask God for help, and He's doing it. And what it is just a willingness that comes from, who knows, it didn't come from me. That's what I know now. But something told me, get in your car and go meet this perfect stranger. Just go. Just do it. And I went and I met her, and we sat in a cocktail lounge for hours. And to me, it's the first miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that is that you tell a complete and utter stranger the truth. And I don't even know if up to that point I knew how to even verbalize the truth. I don't even know if inside me I knew what the truth was. But it just started coming out. The fear, the loneliness, the way that I drank, the fact that I needed to drink, the fact that if, I have to drink, and if you take it away, I don't know what I'm going to do. And she listened, and she told me her story. And I said, June, there's just one problem. I said, I'm really young. I'm only 23 years old. I said, I'm too young to be sober. And she said, honey, I hate to break this to you. She said, I'm 15 and I've got 2 years of sobriety. And I know a lot of you may know who this is. Her name is June G. And June 12-stepped me that moment. And I said, well, June, and I loved what she was saying about Alcoholics Anonymous. It made sense to me. But I said, June, I have a problem. You guys, you go to meetings, don't you? I said, I can't sit in rooms. I hadn't been in lighting like, the lighting we had, like dermatologist lighting. I hadn't been in lighting for years. I had also adjusted my life to bar lighting, mood lighting. Everything was dim. Everything was dark. Nothing was clear. And I said, I can't sit in a room. I have anxiety. There's no way I can sit in a room. Can I do this any other way? And she said, I don't think so. And so I said, well, when do we have to do this? She goes, tonight. And I said, tonight? And so she took me, it was a Friday night, she took me home, she goes, get dressed. And she said, come on. And I was beginning, because I hadn't had my wine in a few hours, I was beginning to get nervous, and she, in those days, they would give us vitamin B and sugar, Snickers bars, lots of Snickers bars. And she kept feeding me candy bars, and she said, just come, when we went to this meeting, and it was huge, and it was this Friday night meeting on Overland, and as what always happens in Alcoholics Anonymous, it just so happened, now she was holding on to one forearm, and her friend Bob was holding on to another, because I was ready to bolt out that door. And the speaker was this big, blonde woman from Texas who talked about how she no longer had anxiety attacks in Alcoholics Anonymous, and she got my attention. That's what this alcoholic needed to hear. If it was someone talking about drinking, I don't know if I would have stayed. I needed to hear this woman who was obsessed about talking about how she was cured of anxiety attacks, and she got my attention. And I thanked June when it was over, and I said, this is great. Do we do this again in a couple of weeks? And she goes, no, there's a candlelight meeting. We're going to the candlelight meeting over at the Alano Club. And we went to the Alano Club. And that was really my early sobriety. It was just June taking me to meetings. And I remember she was going to take me, after about 2 weeks of sobriety, there was this big convention in San Diego, and it was the Southern California Convention, and there was like going to be 7,000 alcoholics there, and there were. And she said to me, the main speaker is a guy by the name of Chuck C., and I want you to hear him. He's just wonderful. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Chuck C. He wrote A New Pair of Glasses for one, and he was a big guru. And when I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, he spoke a lot, and he was very spiritual, and you felt good when people like Chuck and Norm Alpe and Gail Wilson and a lot of those people used to speak. I remember the first time in my life that I was happy right where I was and didn't want to be anywhere else was one night. My first idol in AA, if you will, was a woman named Gail Wilson, and she was speaking at a meeting. And I remember thinking, I couldn't believe it. I thought, I don't want to be anywhere else except right here. I couldn't believe it. I want to be right here, right now. And I couldn't believe it. And I was actually, for the first time in my life, participating in life because I was here. It was just a miracle. I remember I started to cry. I was so shocked. But anyway, she took me to this convention, and she said, this guy is very spiritual. And Chuck had a very full head of white hair, and the lights behind him would kind of give this Catholic glow, like Catholic saints have, this sort of glow behind his head, and I was just, I was probably still coming off of alcohol, frankly, but I mean, I couldn't believe him, and he came up to me after all of these 7,000 alcoholics thanked me. He came up to me and he said, "You're K and you're new." And I thought, oh my God, this man is spiritual. And I didn't know that June had told him to come say hi to the newcomer, but I was so impressed with my early sobriety. But I have to tell you that I didn't stay sober. I slipped for about a year. My sobriety date actually is August the 3rd, 1975, because that first year I was really good at going to meetings and playing the game, but I would slip. I'd get a month in and I'd think, I got to go have a joint, or I have to go have a codeine pill from the dentist or something. And I would just slip. And I just didn't take this program seriously. And then one day, that old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I was at a pool party, and this fascist that lived in the valley named Jerry E. Just sat me down, and she said, you're not cute, you're not clever, you're not anything. She goes, you're a drunk, and you're not taking this seriously. She goes, you almost died the first time, and you don't have another recovery, and this is how we're going to do it this time. And she got me on a program of recovery that was very strict, and I would call her up with my problems, and she wasn't interested. I picked the one sponsor who truly didn't like me, and for me, it was exactly what I needed. If I had had someone that liked me, it wouldn't have worked. She didn't like me, and to this day, I don't think she does, but it was perfect. It was what I needed, and she was just tough, and it got me in shape. It just taught me that AA comes first. She brainwashed me into this program, and thank God she did, because I can tell you that what works for me today is the stuff I learned in those first 20 minutes sitting with Jerry. I used to think that the answers, the longer you're here, the answers become more sophisticated or more intelligent. They become different. And the answers for me have not changed. It's getting out of yourself. It's getting your butt to a meeting. As Sharon says, it's suiting up and showing up. It's taking the action. Don't worry about how you're feeling. Just take the action. It will save you continually. When I had about 4 years of sobriety, I got married. And I got married to someone who was very popular in AA, and I got to tell you, for a long time, my pitch would have ended right about here. In fact, it did. We were rich, and I thought, hey, this Alcoholics Anonymous is great. If you work a good program, you get married, you get rich. We were rich. We had this beautiful house on the hill, and we were the AA couple. I remember going to meetings sometimes, and people would look to see if we were laughing at the speaker. I mean, I'm just telling you what happened, okay? And it was wonderful. For the most part, it was great. I got the family that I'd never had. I got their family, and I raised 2 stepdaughters, and we were very close, and we were together for 13 years, and it was wonderful. And yet, I found out what happens when you have irreconcilable differences. We had differences we could not reconcile. And I realized after 13 years that if I didn't leave, I was going to get drunk. And I knew it. And I hated knowing that, but I knew it. And I loved this person. I really did, very much. And I loved my life. And my identity was very wrapped up, really, in this marriage. I mean, that's who I was. I was the spouse. That's who I was, but I had to leave, and it was very sad, and my whole life changed, boy. And I had about 16 years of sobriety at that time, and I thought, I am not living through this one. And in fact, that's when I met you, Mike. I started going to the Monday night. I don't know what happens here, but I live in Studio City, and what we do there is when you get divorced, you give them Beverly Hills and you take the Valley. And I took the Valley, and I would go, except for Palisades meeting on Monday nights, and I would go to all new meetings, and my ego, I would walk into rooms, and they'd say, are you new? And my ego wanted to say, well, I'm not new. I mean, after all, and give them my AA resume, and I thought, shut up. For all intents and purposes, you are as new as you've ever been. You just need to be in meetings, and you need to get the coffee ground commitment. You need to pick up butts, get your, But I must tell you, I was never well enough, or I had the illusion that I was well enough. I've always been very neurotic, and still am. I'm only all right if I'm working a really good program right now. And so I've never drifted far from the program. I always had commitments, and I've always gone to meetings. And I really believe that that's what saved me, because at that time I was so sad that, I got to tell you, I do sales and PR, and I would have to show up with my clients in sunglasses every day, because every day I remember for the first 3 months I did not stop crying. And one of the wonderful things, to me, one of the most powerful aspects of Alcoholics Anonymous is we, unlike the people out there, do not have to go through anything by ourselves here. I don't care how tragic it is. And I'm not saying divorce is the most tragic thing. I'm not kidding myself that that's the most tragic thing you have to go through. But at that time, for me, it was the most tragic thing I had been through. And I didn't think I was going to make it. I had this little house that I was in that was, it was really small. And every night I would lay in the fetal position with my poodle and think, I'm just not going to get over this. And I was very aware that I had a liquor store right across the street from my house. And it was ever present in my mind. And I was just hanging in. And I know some of you know Riley. Riley works with me, and I would call Riley and I'd say, Riley, I know intellectually when God closes one door, he opens another. But what do you do in the hallway? And he said, honey, you sweep the hallway. And I'd get these one-liners from people. And I'd hang up the phone, just one-liners. And one-liners, I'm telling you, would keep me from minute to minute. And this one-liner was, you sweep the hallway. And so at first I took him literally. I got my little broom out and swept my 5x5 kitchen, because I had learned here that action is the magic word, so I took an action. And while I was sweeping my little kitchen, it occurred to me that he also meant it figuratively, and that is that life is not necessarily a constant, succession of opening doors and closing of windows. It is a lot of time in the hallway. And to me, when I read in our literature that we have to learn to live with some emotional balance in fair weather or in foul, I believe that is sometimes the hallway, and that you just do the best you can. And sometimes just being sober is definitely enough, and that I can't forget that. And that's really what it was about, was just being sober. And I mean, my clients were great. I would come with mascara. They could see under my sunglasses I had mascara coming down my face for a year. And I'll never forget this one woman who was not on the program, but she just helped me so much. She said, what happened, honey? She was a client. I said, I had a divorce. She goes, you're looking at 2 years. Don't let anybody catch you. And she was right. She was right. And I just kind of trudged on with sobriety and did what I was supposed to do, and had lots of commitments. And frankly, I met an entire new group of friends. And these people are some of my closest friends today. I mean, Carissa and I were friends before, who, thank you for coming with me tonight, but I had other friends that I met, really. So I really was, my life started over at that time. And it was great. And in fact, one of my clients not too long ago said, what happened to you about 3 years ago? He said, 5 years ago. It's been 5 years now. I said, you look like shit for about a year. And it was true. But we're taught here that you just suit up and show up. And so I did. And like anything else, I remember once saying to my sponsor, am I ever going to get over this? Am I ever going to feel all right again? And she said, not only are you going to feel all right again, she goes, you will find yourself telling the story, and you will have difficulty even remembering the pain you're going through right now. And I'm here to tell you, if you're going through pain right now, it is going to pass. Like it or not, we heal in spite of ourselves, if we work this program. And it's miraculous, the healings I've seen happen here. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And during that time, unfortunately, my anxiety attacks came back. They'd stopped for like 17 years on this program, but they came back, and they would come back on airplanes, which was really inconvenient. And it wasn't that I was afraid the planes were going to crash. I was afraid that, I gotta hurry, that I would flip out and have an anxiety attack and beg the stewardess to let me out at 33,000 feet, And I remember that what I was doing again during that time is it talks about in step 11 that if our channel to our higher power is blocked with fear, we might recite a prayer or a phrase over and over again. And I'll tell you, I was leaving New York, and it lasted about 2 hours, and the only reason I know that is we were over Kansas City by the time this anxiety attack ended, and the whole time I just recited this prayer that actually my mother taught me, which was a little rhyme. It was, God is guiding me, guarding me, directing me, and protecting me. And I chanted this all the way to Kansas City. And by the time we got there, because the pilot came on to tell us where we were, I was just sweating, but I was exhausted, but it had passed. And I knew I was okay. I wasn't going to flip out. What I was afraid of did not come to pass. And I got up and went into the restroom and freshened up a bit. And when I came out, one of my clients that I had gone to see was right outside the door. And he said, I didn't know you were on my flight. He said, hey, come and join me for a drink. I said, I don't drink, bud. And he said, you don't? He said, shit, you're not getting me on a plane without a drink. He said, look at you. He said, you're calm as a cucumber. I could never be as fly or as good as you. You know, and I went back to my seat, and I thought, little do they know sometimes what it takes for us just to be here. Gail Wilson used to say, I work as hard as I can to stay where I am, you know, and I understand that, and that's how it is, and that's how it is for us, and I'm not ashamed of that anymore or embarrassed by it. I heard a newcomer once in a meeting. I could tell, you know that feeling when you're new, and I don't know if you guys are feeling that right now, but when I was new, I thought, I am never going to have fun again. Now, I told you the kind of fun I was having, but I thought I was never going to have a good time again, you know, that this is it, life is over, this is it. And I couldn't have been more wrong, you know, and there's an old saying, an old sentence around here that I heard speakers say, you know, life is now in session. Are you present? And you do get present here, and you finally are, as you said so well, that you become a part of your life. And I don't know about you, but since it was new for me, so everything has been a learning experience. Very quickly, and I do have to shut up, I told you a little bit about my childhood. I did not have the greatest relationship with my mother. And only in the last 5 years has it really gotten okay. And when it got okay, because really for my first 17 years of sobriety, or 16, we did not talk, my mother and I, very seldom. She never came to see where I lived. We had a very estranged relationship. And when I went through this divorce, she showed up out of the clear blue to be there for me, and she was. And I'm taking her to New York next week. I've never been on a trip with this woman. I'm in the corporate travel business, and I'm taking about 60 people to a little Broadway tour in New York, and I'm taking Mom, you know, and I'm terrified, but I know it's gonna be okay, because there's nothing that I do today under my own steam. And what I mean by that is I am very aware that as of myself, I can't do anything. My own personal belief is I don't care how much sobriety you have. I talk to people with 35 years and 45 years even, and they all tell me the same thing, that it doesn't change. We're as okay as the program we're working right now. And I know that if I work my program that well and I surrender and ask God to help me be the Kay He would have me be and the daughter He would have me be, we'll be all right. My mom and I will be fine. And frankly, she's never been to New York. She's absolutely thrilled. She turned 70 this year, and it'll really. And we're going to go business class, and it's going to be great. For those of you who like happy endings, I got remarried about 2 years ago, and in fact I had gone to a psychic, and I had asked the psychic once. I said, "Am I ever going to meet anyone again?" And she looked at her tarot cards, and she said, "No." And what do you do? You get another psychic is what you do. And I got another psychic, and she said the same thing. But you never know where you're going to meet someone that you're compatible with. I joined a sober bowling league, and I met someone bowling, and we've been very happy. And the reason we're happy is that we're in love with each other, but we're more in love, as corny as this is going to sound, but we're more in love with Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous comes first. If you're new, please give this thing a chance. It's the most wonderful thing in my life, and I just hope I never forget it. Thank you for having me.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control. up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.